start any second here. Okay. So today is still Tisha B'Av. We still have a couple of hours left. We're studying in our standard approach here. We're going into the coming Torah portion, which is Vaetchanan, which always happens after Tisha B'Av. And Vaetchanan, which is found on page 1005 in the Etz Chaim Chumash. It's Deuteronomy chapter 3, starting from verse 23. So this Torah reading, as I said, is always programmed to come out after Tisha B'Av, and therefore it's always read on the Shabbat called Shabbat Nachamu. Nachamu means be comforted, be comforted. And that's the first words of the Haftarah, the prophetic reading from Isaiah, which we read on Shabbat in normal times, and that gives the name, the special name for Shabbat. But so Shabbat Nachamu takes its name from the prophetic reading, but it's always linked to this Torah reading. So as we read it on Tisha B'Av today, we bear in mind that it's also supposed to be taking us past Tisha B'Av. One of the things to notice, of course, is that Tisha B'Av is a day of national mourning. It's a day that we remember destruction and exile. We talked about it last night a little bit. So we mourn the tragedies of the Jewish people, and they are related in a key way to our being either kicked out or not entering the land of Israel itself. According to Jewish tradition, the first tragedy of Tisha B'Av was not the destruction of the first and second temple. Does anybody recall what the very first Tisha B'Av tragedy was? Or once, twice, three times? Yeah, Alan.
Is this Moshe's death? Was on Tisha B'Av?
No.
That's right.
No, Moshe traditionally passed away on the 7th day of Adar. But Tisha B'Av is traditionally the day given for when the spies come back from reconnoitering the land of Israel, and they persuade everybody that they can't go in. So all the way back at the very, relatively speaking, early on in our wandering in the desert, we were supposed to enter the land of Israel fairly quickly after getting out of Egypt, about a little bit over a year after getting out of Egypt. And the spies come back on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av at that point is a neutral day, and it could have been a day of great rejoicing. It could have been a day, it could have been a day when we would have been, given the go-ahead by Moses, based on the spies coming and giving us strength to have courage to go in, and we would have been ready to go into the land of Israel. Instead, we get the message of the report of the spies. We start crying, and the Midrash says that God says, "Now you're crying for nothing on Tisha B'Av, but just wait. Eventually, history will unfold, and there will be things that will really be a tragedy on Tisha B'Av that you'll have to cry for." So there's an irony, a bitter, bitter, bitter irony in that Midrash, which was saying we thought we were in trouble. We thought that there were things to cry about, and we didn't even know what we were in for. So the first Tisha B'Av tragedy is our failure to be willing to go into the land. So it's a little bit of an interesting, maybe even ironic fact, whatever, coincidence, that the Torah reading that we read after Tisha B'Av is about Moses begging to go into the land and not being allowed to go into the land. Right? He Vaetchanan, that's the first word of the Torah portion, and I begged for God's mercy, that God should let me go into the land, and God was angry and said, "No, you're not going into the land." So that's the first part of. So even though it's supposed to be a Shabbat of consolation, we actually read about a painful episode of Moses himself failing to enjoy the gift that that God gave to the rest of the children of Israel, and we have to do a kind of a mental somersault if we want to be comforted, and we have to see ourselves as the next generation that God will not, prevent from getting into the land. We will be comforted. We will be redeemed. We will be allowed to go into the land. Moses paved the way for us, and we will benefit from that. So in a certain sense, the comfort that we have to generate within ourselves is by turning around the story a little bit on its head and adding a lot of missing pieces. So the Torah reading Vaetchanan has some truly significant parts to it that are at the top of the list of significant pieces of Torah, and it has a lot of other stuff in there as well. Moses is really warming up. He started speaking his last speech last week at the beginning of Devarim, and now he's really beginning to be impassioned and eloquent, and he keeps going back and forth. It's a very zigzaggy kind of Torah reading. He keeps going back and forth between celebrating and encouraging and explaining to the Jewish people how amazing it is that they have had the experience and have the relationship with God that they have. And he keeps telling them this is like unique and unbelievable. And then at the same time, he constantly warns them, watch out, if you blow this, you will really engage God's anger. And he keeps warning them and saying, I know that you guys are weak-willed, and just be very careful. So there are these back and forth sections in the Torah portion. The two central amazing pieces of Torah that are found in this one Torah reading are the Shema, the first paragraph of the Shema, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and V'ahavta, the first paragraph, so the first verse, and then the next paragraph. Shema, as we have it in our prayer tradition, consists of 3 paragraphs. So this first paragraph with the lead-in verse, Shema, that's found here. The second paragraph is found in chapter 11 of Devarim, of Deuteronomy. So that's going to be in the next Torah reading next week. And the third paragraph is found backwards. It's found back in Shlach, the very Torah reading that tells us about the spies and their failure to encourage and empower the Jewish people to go into the land. The third paragraph is the very, very conclusion of that Torah reading. So that's how we have put together, we've constructed something called the Shema in all of its paragraphs. But the first part of it is found right here for the first time as a part of a flowing Torah text. And the other super, super important, significant part of the Torah that's here is, anybody want to guess? Yeah, all right, Alan's giving us a big hint here.
10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments. The second version of the 10 Commandments. Moses repeats the story. The 10 Commandments are presented to us within a big, elaborate discussion, again, about how Moses says, can you imagine who else ever had such an experience? And then he says, he talks about the amazing quality of meeting God. And then he goes over the 10 Commandments again. The 10 Commandments were originally recorded in chronological order back in the book of Exodus, 50 days after we got out of Egypt. So this is really almost, 40 years later, and we get the 10 Commandments again. And as we have seen many times, with small differences between the way the 10 Commandments are recorded out of God's revelation back in Exodus, and now Moses repeating that revelation. So that's another part that's here. And as I say again and again and again, we have warnings and exhortations in various kinds of ways that Moses delivers to us to sort of get us emotionally and psychologically and spiritually ready to take the next step of going into the land. So that's, sort of pretty much what's in here. And the question now is, what are we going to focus on? What are we going to take a look at, especially? So if there are suggestions about what you really would like to concentrate on, here we go. This is the time to make those suggestions. 1, 2, 2.5, 3. Okay, so just in case this happened, I thought about what I would possibly ask us to pay attention to. And we may have actually discussed this at other times. Sarita, you remember everything. You remember everything that we've ever discussed, I know. So you'll tell me if this actually has been something that we've devoted some time to. But nevertheless, I think it's worth looking at again. And it's not going to be the Shema, and it's not going to be the 10 Commandments. But let's look at page 1007. So it's Deuteronomy chapter 4, starting... well, let's start with verse 4, even though the section that I want to look at is verse 5, starts with verse 5, but verse 4 is famous. So we can start there. And I want to invite somebody to do us the honor of reading. Anybody? Alan, thank you. So starting with verse 4, in the English, it's given as a kind of the middle of a sentence. In the Hebrew, it's just a verse. Okay, starting verse 4, 1007.
It's not just any verse. We use this every week.
That's why I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't skip over it. I couldn't start from 5. I figured, come on.
Well, you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today.
Right.
See.
So wait. Let's just stop there because it's a little bit. I just put it in there because, we needed to give it a little respect. The translation, of course, is a translation. It makes it into the second half of a sentence. In the Hebrew, it's a separate verse, and you could read it as a freestanding verse. And of course, as Alan says, we actually say this verse at every Torah service. When right before the Torah is opened for the first Aliyah, so we say, okay, now let's get everybody here and pay attention. Here's the first Aliyah, and then we say, Baruch Natan Torah L'Yisrael B'Kedushato. Oh, blessed be God who has given the Torah in God's holiness as a gift to us. And then we all say, V'atem ad beikim b'Hashem Elokeichem Chaim Kolchem Hayom. Right? So we read it as a freestanding statement. The statement translated here is, you who held fast to the Lord your God. The Hebrew can be translated simply as you, it's present tense. V'atem had beikim. You who keep on holding fast. Present continuous. Right? I don't know why they translate it into past. You who keep on cleaving, right? Clinging, gluing yourselves to God, you are all alive this very day. And that's the way we actually mean it when we say this at the Torah service. We mean it that we're the ones clinging to God. We're the ones who are clinging to God through the Torah. And we're alive this very day, thousands and thousands and thousands of years after Moses has said this verse. Okay, so that's one of these kinds of spiritual uplift verses that Moses says in Deuteronomy. And now let's go into the section that we'll see that has a little more flow to it. Go ahead.
See, I have imparted to you laws and rules as the Lord my God has commanded me, for you to abide by in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on hearing of all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is the Lord our God, whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching that I set before you this day?
Okay, so that's the section that I wanted us to look at a little bit and try to absorb. So first, it starts with a personal statement by Moses. I've knocked myself out. I've worked very hard to teach you all of these rules and regulations, all of the laws and judgments and so on, just as God, and he says it in the personal, just as God, my Almighty God, the eternal, my Almighty God, has commanded me. God commanded me to teach you, and I have done the best I can. I have tried to discharge my responsibility to God and to you. God has given me the responsibility to teach you, and here it is. So I've taught you all of this, and where is the challenge going to really become serious? When you get into that land. I'm not going to be there anymore, right? I've been the chaperone, I've been the mentor, I've been the teacher, and you're going to go into this land, and you'll carry with you the teaching, but you're not carrying with you the teacher. You're not carrying me with you. So now the question will be, will you keep them or not? So that's verse 6, right? Ushmartem va'asitem. So the translation here is observe them faithfully, by taking those two words and putting them as a related phrase. Literally, again, one thing is take good care. Ushmartem, take good care. The word Shomrei Emunah, right? Be guardians, be on your guard, right? Va'asitem, and do it and perform these things. So they're not necessarily, so the way they do it, observe them faithfully, but it's two distinct things that we can appreciate to make sure that you don't lose this. Now it's going to be on you, right? I'm not going to be there to help you out. And then we have the next phrase, which is I think of particular interest. So the way that I translated is, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples. What will be proof? How does everybody here understand this sentence? If that will be proof, is that whose sound is that? Susan, can you mute yourself, please? Let's see if that will work. Susan, can you mute yourself? You're not muted.
Me?
Yes. Can you mute your? Oh, thank you, Alan. Okay, now you're muted. Okay, so now I don't hear the buzzing. Okay. So my question again, what is that which will be a proof? For that will be proof of your wisdom. What is that? What is the proof? What does that refer to? All right, so one simple way to read this is, observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom, meaning if people see that you observe these faithfully, that will prove that you've got seichel, that you're wise.
Or that you're living a good, or the way you live your life is such a good life that people see the wisdom of your practices.
So yes, so I want to make clear that distinction. There's two different ways of doing this. One thing is to say that our faithfulness to our tradition, if we are faithful to our tradition, people will be impressed. People will say, well, you know what? They're smart to keep that tradition. They know what it means to hold on to their identity. You know, we have what's called identity politics these days, and it's really, you know, since the 60s, it's been considered kind of an admirable thing for people to hold on to their identity. You know, in American sociological history, the overarching goal for so long was the melting pot idea of make everybody melt together. Everybody should fit in, right? So the distinctiveness of each group was played down by that group, by that minority group, because they wanted to fit in. Sarita, you were on that Trua call. Beryl, I think, was on the Trua call also, right? And we heard a testimony of an immigrant who grew up here. He came here when he was something like 4 or 5 years old, and he spoke about the fact that he tried so hard to learn how to speak English without an accent, because he knew that if he was going to be obvious as an other, he was not going to be respected or accepted in the same kind of way. So even today, this guy was a young guy, but certainly back in the old days, and this is a standard immigrant story. The first generation doesn't fit in. The kids do everything they can to fit in, and partly, unfortunately, that means sometimes breaking off from their traditions because they're embarrassed by their traditions. They're embarrassed by the accent. They're embarrassed by the specificity, the particularism of the customs, and they want to fit in like everybody else. They want to be like everybody. So here the Torah says, it's sort of catching up with, at least in some, and I guess I would say some of the more liberal talk today is to be proud of your particularity. And some of the rebellion of marginal people today, as they see how much they've been shafted by the majority culture, is to be proud of yourself despite what everybody thinks is supposed to be the norm, quote unquote. So being distinctive is a very problematic challenge. And it's not simple one way or the other. Yet what the Torah seems to be saying here, at least in one translation, is that people will be impressed. They'll say, this shows how wise you are, that you're holding on to your tradition, that you're not relinquishing your tradition, is something that that people will respect. This is to go back to the previous page. This is in stark contrast to our own proclivities. So back on 1007, let's look at verse 3. One verse before Ve'atem ad Beikim. Okay, Alan, you got it?
Yeah. You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did in the matter of Baal Peor, that the Lord your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal Peor.
And then verse 4, while you who stuck with God, you are still alive. So Baal Peor is one of the many, many, many times. Baal Peor is an idol. It's an idolatrous cult. It was the story that we had at the end of the book of Numbers, where we ran after the Midianite and Moabite seducers to worship their God, and then Pinchas has to put an end to the whole debacle that's taking place. So that happens at the end of the book of Numbers. There's a plague; it's all terrible. But what happened there? We run after another idolatrous culture. And that's what Moses is constantly worried about. That's what we're going to do. So it happens throughout the rest of Devarim. It happens in this Torah reading as well. That Moses is saying, you're going to go into that new land, and you're just going to go, wow, this is great. Let's just fit in. So he's trying to now make a counter argument, not of, if you do that, God will zap you really seriously. You saw that already. That's one kind of argument. And now what he's doing is something completely different. Now he's saying, you know what? If you want to be accepted, you want to be respected, you don't have to follow them. They're actually going to look to see, are you really going to follow your own distinctive ways? If you do, then they will see that you are a wise people. So that would be one way to translate that. I want to just put out one other translation, then I want to open it again for everybody. The other translation is that we don't translate it as that will be proof. There is no word proof in the Hebrew. The literal translation of the Hebrew is, for she or that is your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of the peoples, right? Who will hear about all of these rules. In other words, it's the rules themselves that are respected. It's not whether we're loyal to them or not, but it's the fact that they will be very, very impressed by the Torah. They'll go, wow, this is a pretty cool system. This is a pretty amazing set of rules. This is, love your neighbor as yourself, not bad. Don't mix milk and meat together. Yeah, wow, that's pretty wise. No, just kidding. But this is now the striking claim that Moses and the Torah is putting out, that it's the Torah itself which will be recognized as being so full of wisdom and understanding. So I want us to appreciate that they're not quite the same thing. One is about our own behavior and our own loyalties and how we act them out. And one is that simply when the other peoples will encounter this book and they open it up and they start reading it, they'll be impressed and they'll say, this is wise. This is full of understanding. Okay, and then the rest of the verse says, V'amru, and they shall say, right? They'll say. So you know what? Read that, please again, surely, and then again through the rest of the paragraph.
Surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is the Lord our God, whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching that I set before you this day?
Okay. So anybody want to chime in with any reflections about what we've looked at so far?
Yeah. I think that the juxtaposition is really interesting because, I think about it, why the tendency to want to be like everyone else, to assimilate, but that may happen because you don't sort of appreciate what you have. And so here it's really that you have something so precious, and so don't don't forget that. And of course, if you forget that, then you're more likely to just to only think about, oh, I need to fit in. So I think that the fact that he reminds them about the all poor, I mean, it's sort of, even regardless, even if God hadn't taken the action that he had, just think about the motive. I'm thinking about the motivations for why people might have followed this other practice instead of staying with what we have. Yeah.
Yeah, Alan.
There's an interesting, when you say the word motivation, as far as the motivation to Moses to impart this at this particular juncture. I mean, the people are about to go into Egypt. They're about to go into Canaan. About to go into Israel.
They wish.
Yeah, well, that was 39 years ago.
Right.
They were about to go in. Moshe is not going to be there. God is going to be one step even more so removed, and the the tendency or to go astray because Dad's not there, and so there's certainly And so the point that he was trying to, it's as if I'm saying, look, observe these things, not because I say so, but because they really are cool, because this really is a good way and it's not going to seem cool right away, but once you start doing it, the other kids will see that it is cool, and then you will be cool. It's kind of like how he's trying to motivate them to hold on to it and to give it a chance. Not after the first day or the second day that people are making fun of you, but wait a week, wait 2 weeks, wait 3 weeks, and people will come around and see, how well this way of life is relevant and one that should be emulated.
Right. So that last part about that, then they'll come around and they'll see it too. That's really crucial here, because there are, again, Moses attacks this from every angle. Throughout the whole book of Deuteronomy, he makes arguments coming from different angles. And one possible angle is, the hell with what everybody else says. How many times as a parent said to their kid, I don't care what the peer pressure is. I don't care what they think is right. If they said jump off the cliff, would you jump off the cliff? Right? You have these kinds of arguments all the time. So there's a strong, thread throughout the Torah and throughout Moses' speeches of just defy the others. Don't pay attention to anybody else. Don't care about what everybody else thinks. This is from God, and this is the best of the best of the best, and the heck with what everybody else is. They're all a bunch of idiots, right? And they're evil anyway, so there is that part of it. Here, what I find so intriguing about this section is that Moses goes the opposite way, and Moses accepts the fact that what other people think is important to us, and that even if we're being told to completely act differently than the other person, we are concerned about how they think about us, about how they look at us, about how they evaluate us, how they judge us. So Moses is saying here, and that's gonna, that's sometimes you test it out and see, is that true? Have the other peoples actually thought better of us for being faithful to the Torah? Have they thought that the Torah itself is such a wise and amazing document? Is that really true? Is that something that stands up to the test of history? Yes, Arita. You have to unmute.
Yeah, I'm not. I was just going. Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe not so. But
right.
I'm also thinking that this also, the suggestion is here is, you stay true to yourselves, but do it in a way that other people, that you're not closing yourself off from other people, because that's how they see you. So maybe also part of the issue for not being accepted is isolating to the extent that other people cannot see it. I mean, I'm thinking about, when the kids were little, and I encouraged the kids, invite, friends over for Shabbat dinner, and, some of the kids actually came a lot and they wanted to come, right? And they had never encountered this. This was like so fun. Yeah. And so I think that, if we had, if I had insisted, no, we're going to do this, and we're not going to ever invite anybody else except someone who's Jewish, then I think those other people wouldn't have had a chance to see just how remarkable it was what we were doing.
Right. Great. Right. I think so. This is an ancient, challenge, and Moses is particularly, like Alan was saying, particularly concerned because we're at a threshold moment, literally. But it ends up becoming eternal for us, right? It becomes the constant challenge of how we live in the world. And this is, I think, a very relevant question in terms of our Tisha B'Av experiences, and in general about being a Jew. How do we negotiate this? How do we negotiate this balance between being part of the world and being actually Hebrews, right? Ivri, Everybody's on the other side of the river, and we're on this side. We are a minority. We are very stubborn, group of people who refuse to go along. This is one of the the eternal accusations against us. One of the prime beginning places for an anti-Semitic attack. They don't they're not like us. When Haman talks to Achashverosh, and he says, there's this people, they're not like us. They don't really, they're datehem shonot, they really have different ways of going about it. They're not about life, and people that have, we struggle. I mentioned meat and milk before. Keeping kosher. What a tricky thing that is, right? Do you keep kosher in an environment where nobody else is keeping kosher? So how do you sit in the cafeteria together? How do you go to a restaurant together? How do you go to somebody else's house? So Sarita's mentioning you inviting people over to your home to eat in your home. Great, that's beautiful. What do you do when you get a reciprocated invitation? What do you do? So these kinds of questions have come up forever and ever and ever, and they're not easy to answer. It was easier when the world was less tolerant of us, right? When the world was obviously against us. This was part of what I was looking at last night. The shift between Yehuda Halevi and back to our time. It was easy for Yehuda Halevi to talk about, we are the persecuted people, we are in exile, they put us in exile, and so on. But now when we live in an open society and we want to be part of that open society, how do we figure out how to do that without losing ourselves? So these are the most ancient questions and the most current questions for a person who wants to stay glued to God and to the Jewish way of life. This is a big question to this very, very moment. How do we see the world as a contributing factor to our own way of thinking? Is it only one way? Is it, well, look, we keep the Torah, and then look, everybody is impressed by us. That's the way it seems to be being presented here by Moses. They'll really think it's cool. Eventually, they'll see that we are so wise and we are so wonderful. So there's the direction is we keep on our strict and beautiful and holy Jewish ways, and eventually they see that we're really terrific. Is there any feedback that we get from being in the world? Is it simply to just survive in the world and finally earn acceptance and respect? Or is there any value? What is the value? Because Moses keeps on warning us, don't mix in, don't be too influenced. So what is the value then of the surrounding culture? All right, so let me continue then. 1 second.
Clearly, we're expected to influence them.
Okay, so
he wouldn't have said put it on display, so to speak, if we weren't expected. A prince amongst nations. I mean, we're supposed to influence in some way, not through active marketing or proselytizing, but through example of how to make a betterment of society.
So again, that's the one-way street that I was saying. We're the good guys, and we are showing everybody how terrific our way of life is, and eventually they get it. And I think that that's part of the influence as well. I want to, I asked before, historically, is Moses' description, does it bear up to the test of history? And there's a deep irony, I think, in our history, because we have stayed a very small people, but our influence in the world, as this influence that we put out into the world, has been so much greater proportionately than our numbers, right? And last night I mentioned, we've been living basically, now we live in the entire global village, but for our history until today, we've lived basically in two civilizations: Christian civilization and Muslim civilization, the Islamic civilization. Both of those civilizations, which have completely overtaken us and completely conquered the world, like they have, basically 2/3 of the world. They are the offspring of the Torah, right? They are crucially formed and influenced by the wisdom that they recognize that's in the Torah. So there's this amazing, phenomenon that we have actually, by being repackaged, but it's because so much of the world has said, "Wow, there's some amazing stuff in this book." We have to, adapt it a little bit for ourselves, but there's a tremendous factor of being impressed by the Torah. At the same time, we have been, as a result of not then joining in with the rest of the world in this new version, we've been beaten down and tortured and oppressed and murdered, for 2,000 years. So the people that admired us the most also resented us the most. So it's been a little bit of a tough tension between those two things. But we should not disregard the fact that the influence and the acceptance of the wisdom of the Torah has been humongous. But now we live, in a little bit more of an open world. First of all, we're much more open now to the East, which wasn't touched in the same way by Jewish influence. So now we've got, an all-encompassing possibility of engagement with the world. And then look what happens. The Jews run after Buddhism like crazy. Again, we're like totally overrepresented in something like that. But my question comes back to, so what are we as distinctive, faithful adherents of this very specific minority way of life? What do we get from the world? What good do we derive from the world? So I want to share a text, and you'll have to bear with me for a half a second. Here it is. That's not what I wanted to do. Hold on, sorry. Oy. Sorry, this is not what I want. Oy. How do you get out of this thing? Wrong. All right. This is not, now I'm stuck. Can you hear me still? Somebody unmute yourself.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
but I can't see anybody because I'm now being blocked by this screen that's not working.
We can hear you.
But
Okay.
but your screen is not being shared. You were trying to do a screen share?
No, I'm trying to put, here, let me see now if this is going to work. So now I'm back, right? And now if I go down to here, and I go into, where can I put here? Here's the chat, right? So now I'm going to put in, oh, here it is. I put it in here. Okay, so now I have just shared a link with everybody. This is the way John did it. So I hope that some people can try to open it up.
It's gone.
Yep.
Does it work?
Yep. I think so.
Okay,
Rabbi
good.
Shmuel Moshe Glasner.
Right. So this is a text that I find very interesting. It's a little dense and a little technical, but if we if we spend a few minutes with it, maybe we'll benefit. I hope. Okay, so the general discussion that he is in the middle of here, that this is an excerpt from, is trying to figure out what does the Torah actually make explicit and what it doesn't make explicit. How come some things are specifically mentioned in the Torah, do this, don't do that, and other things the Torah just doesn't say a word? Does the Torah not care? So, okay, Alan, you've got it, and you're the reader for today. So start out from the first paragraph, please.
Okay, I lost it. Here we go. Moreover, you should know that regarding all repulsive things that would disgust a person, even if the Torah did not forbid them, any person who transgressed and ate them would be more despicable than a person who transgressed an explicit prohibition of the Torah. For with regard to anything that has been accepted by enlightened people as being abominable, even though it is not explicitly forbidden by the Torah, if a person were to transgress in that matter, he would be worse than the one who transgresses the Torah's laws.
Okay, so let's take in what he's saying, and this is the point that is relevant for what I'm trying to bring out. And this guy was an amazing rabbi. He wasn't some liberal, pretender. He was one of the major scholars of his time. And what he's saying here is that we gain from living in a culture where people think about things, take things seriously, work out what's right and what's wrong. And he says there's a whole bunch of stuff not mentioned in the Torah because the Torah doesn't need to mention it, because we're going to learn it from society. That's his claim. So he says this is what we get from everybody else. It's a very, very strong claim. It's not simply that they'll respect us. The reason that it's important for them to respect us is because they actually have something to teach us also. We have to respect them. What good is it to have somebody who you don't respect you? Right? Who cares if somebody who you have absolutely complete disdain for, right? You think they're a deplorable, to use a word, right? So if the deplorable person thinks that you're really cool, what does that give you? It's only when somebody who represents something that you find valuable then says, you know what, I think that you've got something to what you're doing. When they say, oh, you're wise and understanding, then we feel affirmed because they represent something valuable themselves. So what Shmuel Glasner is saying here is that that's what, when we find ourselves in an enlightened society where their approbation of our way of life makes us feel better, then we need to open our eyes and learn from societal norms that are all around us about what's acceptable and what's not. As opposed to saying, we've got our own Jewish way, and our Jewish way is the exclusive expression of all things that are reasonable and worthwhile and good and moral and holy. What he's saying is, no, there are other things that are not in the Torah that we have to add to the Torah because the Torah is telling us to get it from society. So, for example, let's just read the example that he gives.
For example, the Torah says the man shall not wear a woman's garment, but it is not explicit in the Torah that one may not walk in public naked. Yet it is a social convention and set rule accepted by all reasonable people. Adam and Eve, right after their sin, felt that it would be great degradation for them to walk around naked like wild beasts, and they were shamed and sewed fig leaves to make girdles with which to cover themselves.
One more paragraph.
Now let me ask you, if someone to awaken from his sleep, lying naked in his bed, to find the house on fire so that he must flee outside to save his life, and there's nothing before him but a woman's dress with which to cover his nakedness. What should he do? Is it better for him to go out in the streets naked, transgressing no explicit prohibition of the Torah, or should he put on the dress which is prohibited by the verse?
Right. And his answer is, isn't it obvious that you put on the woman's dress? You don't go out. What's wrong with you? Nobody goes out in public naked. So he goes, but does the Torah ever tell you that? Does the Torah ever say that this is a prohibition? So he says, get real. The Torah gives you prohibitions that you're not going to know from living in society. That's what the Torah gives you as value added. And now he says, even as he continues, he says, in my view, etc., we're not going to have time to read it. He says, so if you have a choice between wearing something that's explicitly prohibited by the Torah or going out naked, he says it's a worse sin to go out naked than to wear the garment that the Torah tells you you're not allowed to wear. Because in the end, what you're going to be doing is such a gross violation of being a human being that's so much more, of a paramount importance. Now, this is a guy that, believe me, he never transgressed anything in the Torah if he could help it. The guy was super, super, super punctilious and observant, and he was the rabbi of Klosenberg. He was a revered sage and a revered pious man, but he's making this very, very striking claim that that other people have something to teach us. This is a very not obvious claim in many parts of the ultra-Orthodox world today, right? The people that he comes from, the people that he lived with, the people that he was exactly identical with in every kind of behavioral way, and even the way he looked, very, very often have a complete disdain for the rest of the world, don't believe that they have to follow anything that the rest of the world says. In fact, the opposite. If the rest of the world says yes, then the answer must definitely be no, right? This was part of the terrible tragedy of people not listening, when the pandemic began. And in the ultra-Orthodox community, they went about their business because, are you kidding? Society doesn't know what they're talking about. Doctors don't know what they're talking about. The government certainly doesn't know what they're talking about. And the idea that you can rip off the government, or the idea that you can, completely avoid participating in society, comes out of a complete lack of respect for the outside world, which Shmuel Moshe Glasner is saying is in total violation of this portion of the Torah. Total violation of this portion of the Torah. Let's look now at the last paragraph. It's the last two lines on the first page, and it goes to the next page. See the responsa of Chacham Tzvi.
See the responsa Chacham Tzvi regarding a similar matter, wherein he concludes that we should avoid an action allowed by the Torah or prohibited by local non-Jewish custom, because we should not profane God's name, Chilul Hashem. But I say that anything that is deemed repulsive in the eyes of the enlightened nations is prohibited to us without the reason of Chilul Hashem. Rather, it is because of the commandment, you shall be holy. Anything that is prohibited to the general enlightened humanity as a civilizing rule cannot be permitted to us, a holy people. For it's impossible that there be something forbidden to them and permitted to us. Rather, the Torah stated that the nations of the world should say about us, what a great nation, with such righteous laws and statutes.
That's our portion that we were just reading.
And if they will stand on a higher level in laws and ethical rules, they will say about us, a foolish and disgusting people, not wise. For our level of civilization and morals must always be higher than the level of other nations, not lower.
Okay. So he, in the end, he has great expectations, to coin a phrase, for the Jewish people. It comes out of the injunction to be holy. This is what he says. And this is actually based on also what Nachmanides, Ramban, told us in his commentary. The mitzvah to be holy, Kedoshim to you, to become a holy people, to become a holy individual, each and every one of us, is the overall catch-all mitzvah that God says, I can't go through every single, incident in the world and in your life. I can tell you certain things. I can give you guideposts. But in the end, they're all supposed to coagulate together into a coherent vision of just try to be holy. And what Shmuel Glasner is saying here is that the standard begins with the general society. We should learn from the general society, and of course, with a critical eye, right? If what's going on in the general society is Baal Pa'or, if moral degeneracy is going on, if completely misplaced values are being adopted, then that's no good. So there's plenty of difficulty here in terms of judging. Well, what's civilizing and what's not? Is acceptance and celebration of the plurality of sexualities that we have today. Is that a civilizing, life-affirming, human dignity-affirming idea, or is it moral depravity? Good question, right? I have very strong feelings that it's a step forward, that we're actually recognizing God's image in each human being when we do that. But we have plenty of religious people who are still use that word abomination as the way to express what they feel. So it doesn't take anybody off the hook about making these kinds of judgment calls, but it does open up the field of who do we have to be talking with? Who can we learn from? Who should we be listening to? In a way that is much, much more exciting to me, much more challenging than if we thought that, okay, everything in the Torah and nothing else counts. Sarita, yeah.
So this charge is really, really interesting, because I guess it goes back again to how much do we isolate ourselves versus how much do we live in the world. And it seems here that Rabbi Glasner is saying, no, the charge is not to, keep yourself totally to yourselves, so that there's a fence on the off chance that you might, transgress some Torah law. In fact, you're supposed to live in the world and yet still maintain your identity. So it's really interesting. It's a very interesting charge here. Yeah,
right.
Much more challenging one.
Right.
Yeah.
Well put. Yes. And just one last word about this and in terms of Tisha B'Av also. Rav Glasner took a radical step because he was a man of tremendous integrity, and he saw this challenge the way Sarita was talking about it, and he saw it that for the Jewish people, he felt that challenge could best be met through Zionism. And that way, he actually totally broke off from his community. He left Klausenberg, and he made Aliyah in like 1920, I think. And he died a couple of years later in Israel. And that whole chapter in his life is sort of censored out of the biographies that they have, because he was undeniably one of the great leaders in his generation of that community. And, the fact that he actually became personal close friends with Rav Kook, who was the chief rabbi in Israel, just starting at that point, is sort of like left out of the discussion when people talk about what a great rabbi he was, and what a great Talmud scholar and so on. But that was his takeaway. His takeaway was, how do I maintain my distinctiveness and yet fully engage in the world? I can't do that in exile. I can't do that in a minority struggling, circle the wagons kind of mentality. That was for him one of the great blessings of the Zionist revolution was, hey, I'll be able to have a home, I'll be able to have a place to call my own, where I can be all that I can be as an equal partner with everybody else in the world. So that kind of vision I still find very meaningful. All right, yasher koach to everybody.
Yasher koach. I know I don't remember ever studying this this section before, so thank you very much.
Great.
Okay. Take care. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.